Welcome, everyone, to the People Solve Problems podcast. This is Jamie Flinchball, your host, and I have a special guest with us today, Greg Scaven. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Jamie.
Glad to have you on here. You've got a very deep background. Won't go into all of it, but you have over 20 years of experience as a P&L leader, driving improvements through lean best practices, across the enterprise. 30 years experience as a technical engineering leader, responsible for dozens of new product innovations in automotive, aerospace, defense, other markets with a deep expertise in pyrotechnics, explosives, propellants, things that go boom only when you want
Right.
them to, right? In nice and
Exactly.
controlled ways. So, very interesting background. So I want to kind of talk about, just start with your experience with problem solving techniques and methods. You learn how to solve problems as an engineer. You learn how to solve problems in the U.S. Army, as a lean thinker, as a business leader. So kind of share with us your sort of experience with experimenting, exploring, adapting, integrating different problem solving ideas and techniques and methods.
Yeah. I love this whole concept around problem solving, right? Because as I think about my engineering background, and maybe I don't think it was just in the defense industry, but I worked in a high reliability industry where things that go boom have to go boom when they're supposed to go boom, right? And they're not supposed to go boom for most of the time they're in existence. So, reliability and quality are so closely integrated with one another. And so I would say my first introduction to really problem solving was all a part of corrective action kinds of things, right? Something doesn't go right. And so, we're kind of trained as leaders to they get the five whys, and we coach people to make sure it's not exactly five and make sure you find true root cause. And, I kind of first got exposed to all of that through good corrective action processes, right? How do we think about our quality management system? And what do we need to do to make sure that we have really a world class quality management system? Because it's only those world class quality management systems that are going to make sure that you have six nines or more reliability in devices, right? To make sure that when a device is on a production line, by the time it leaves a plant, you've got a very, very, very high probability that it's going to work the way it's intended to work. And so getting really religious about digging at root cause, demonstrating that one can turn on the failure mode, turn off the failure mode, and then demonstrating the effectiveness of the preventative action that goes into place for the corrective action that goes into place. That was just sort of kind of, I learned all that from being an engineer and being an engineering leader. And it wasn't until really my days as a P&L leader within Danaher that Danaher, as a part of its Danaher business system, DBS, introduced some sort of formal problem solving technique. And I had the opportunity to go through that training like a lot of the P&L leaders did. And I thought one of the things that was just great about that was that this wasn't so much about training the people in Gemba in where the real work occurs. This is training the leadership.
Mhm.
This is training the leadership team because this is a key skill for teams to get better. And you need to be good at this. You need to understand not so much the technical details of all the things I was dealing with as an engineer, and so they trained us to look at setting up problems. And so much emphasis was on, kind of the general concept was spend 70% of your time, right? So the majority of your time on really trying to define what the problem is. And how do you spend time as a leader coaching the team to really dig at what's the problem you're trying to solve? And so I think combined my engineering experience and digging with the technical details, and then sort of combined with that training around what's it look like to coach teams. And we did a lot of work around, Toyota production system stuff and A3, just like, you kind of talk about in your book, people, about problem solving, Jamie. I think that was my first exposure, and it formed a basis for a lot of the work I did as a P&L leader from that point forward at Danaher and then onward with Fortive and other businesses around, there are some key things we're trying to solve as problems. Um, we don't have six of them at any one time. I ran small organizations, so you know we can only digest these key problems that are really important for our customers. So, what are those two, or probably in most cases, no more than three things that we're going to integrate into our regular leadership cadence when we get together for an ops review or we're reviewing metrics? We would carve out time to have the team present for 45 minutes to an hour. Where are you in problem solving? Right. And so we would review that as a leadership team. But it was like most things, it was a journey. I started out and you kind of do what you need to do to make sure that you can demonstrate root cause and you're delivering a high quality product. And then a transition from an individual contributor to being a leader of people where you're trying to do more of how do you coach people to think about problem solving and what are you doing to really pressure test that they're doing a good job of thinking about involving the entire team.
Yeah. So I want to come back to your growth into Danaher business system and P&L leadership. But let me go back to your engineering time and the corrective action process. There's sometimes that the processes like the corrective action process can feel very procedural and bureaucratic and lots of paperwork. Um, what do you tell young engineers or just new engineers that what's key to success in working your way through a corrective action process when you're doing real root cause problem solving on a technical problem? What are some of the keys to actually go through that and deliver what you need to deliver?
Yeah, I always think whether it's problem solving or any specific tool, I one thing's maybe I was trained to look for it after a while, but man, I really tried to discourage teams by being a slave to the tool. The tool is there to help guide, but the power of critical thinking is really the most important element to any of this, right? So when I get with an engineering team and they're worried about filling out the form, I try to tell people, listen, the form is there to guide you. We can change the form. The form isn't gospel. What I really want to understand is what did you learn as you've been studying this problem? One of the things that we would constantly do is when we would do these problem solving reviews, we would always go back to reframing what is the problem you're trying to solve? Because everything kind of starts with that. So if we would go back to that, and sometimes that problem statement could evolve with new learning. So if the problem statement moved from the last time we looked at the next time we learn it, that'd be the first thing to really try to understand. But I think I would always tell people the power of critical thinking is going to be your key to success in these kinds of journeys. And the other thing too is a matter of making sure that, just that whole power of going out to Gemba, the real place, right? Where does the work really occur? I would try to, in some cases, it wasn't practical depending on locations and things like that. But if we were doing a problem solving exercise, I mean, I would really try to encourage the team and say, let's go. I ran a mostly manufacturing operations, but let's go out to the manufacturing place and let's look at what you learned. Show me, bring me into the lab. I'm
Mhm.
comfortable in the lab. If I need to put on safety glasses or a smock, that's fine. But go out there and show me, tell me what you did. Where did you learn this? Let's go out and talk to the production line workers. You had this observation. I would love to see what's happening. If it's in Operation 80, show me in Operation 80. And maybe there's history there on the floor that this particular operation has a low first pass yield. So there's something we could look at there. But I think making sure that the team is really going out and learning from what's happening in the real world and that it's informed by what's really important to the customer, in this case, high reliability, making sure that no bad parts could potentially leave. Those things are just kind of sacrosanct in our particular industry. But if it's related to a growth problem, as an example, sales teams not hitting their goal, I mean, that's a really good area where we're trying to look at. I want to understand when the team is reviewing data, I want to understand, tell me what data you've looked at. show me the thinking that went into that. Is this, a classic example of that might be, we're missing our sales goal, but in 8 of our regions we're performing, but it's really in 2 regions we're lacking. So in those cases, right, what's different in those 2 regions? Why is it different? Do we understand what's different about it? Do we have different processes? Um, are we doing things different from a standard work standpoint? But really trying to understand, informed with data, not just hunches because you're sitting in a conference room, about what's really leading to this problem.
Yeah. So I love that you started with critical thinking, and the tool is just a guide. It's not
Yeah.
meant to be there, but you kind of open the door into an entire short course on coaching problem solving. And so all these beautiful questions that really help get to the essence of that critical thinking. So coming back to your sort of transition from an engineering an engineer solving technical problems on closed loop systems where you can isolate a root cause, to a P&L leader where you're dealing with people and strategy, and I'll say not closed loop systems. And um, so what was hard about making some of those transitions to where you can't necessarily replicate a failure mode all the time and turn it on, turn it off in the same way you can in a lab,
Yeah.
and there's multiple contributing factors to how did that transition to problem solving in a fuzzier P&L people leadership world go?
Great question. Because I can always think about, in some cases, you've got these low, I call some of these things, there's the difference between sort of caused problems and created problems, right? So
Mhm.
so caused problems are the ones that kind of, me as an engineer, I really like those, right? Because I've got something that's a consequence of something that wasn't maybe manufactured correctly, or a spec wasn't understood. And those things are, sometimes it's really hard to turn on and off mechanisms there, and you end up with sort of most probable causes, but you have a good scientific rationale or engineering rationale that's documented why you've concluded those things, right? So you get the stack up of environmental tolerances, and maybe that leads to a worst case condition. I think as a P&L leader, though, what we struggle with is, we all collectively struggle with these sort of creative problems, right? So a sales problem is kind of a classic example of a creative problem, right? I
Mhm.
have a certain goal that in this region, if I go back to my earlier example, I want to have so many sales, and then we didn't achieve that. So it's harder to turn on, kind of like, okay, this works, this doesn't work. And I think this is where the power of experimentation is so great, right? Because we can say, all right, well, we don't really know what's going to work, but there's a lot of different things we could do. So based on the team's recommendations, what are the top 3 ideas you think you could do that are things that are different from what we do today, that we could go try and we could sort of instantly turn on and get feedback from,
Mhm.
right? And then have the team go out and be good about doing the follow up and the holding people accountable part, right? That's what we do as leaders, but making sure that the team is going out there and really saying, okay, we are going to do these things. This is what we did. Here's what the results led to. And obviously, when you look at those early returns, you could iterate on the things that didn't quite work exactly well. There might be things that completely bombed that you say, all right, let's not do that anymore. But let's double down on anything where we saw a lift in sales because of this new action we took. But I think that's where, as leaders, what we really want to try to do is encourage teams to be quick to enact these ideas, look for the early returns, understanding what metrics we're really going to measure here, and then let's double down on the things that work. And then once those things do work, how do we go about redefining, okay, this is the new standard work that we want to go implement here from this point forward, either in this region or as a part of our overall sales progress, right? So,
Yes, sir. Throughout this conversation, you've talked a lot about things that relate to problem solving as a learning practice, whether it's going to the Gemba, asking the right questions, being curious about what actually happens, or experimentation, as you're talking about here. Um, how do you ensure that even under the pressures of the P&L leadership, and getting people to hit their targets and perform each quarter, each year, that an experiment that doesn't work is still okay? that this is a learning process and that there's value in the learning. So how do you embrace the learning when we're also sort of driven for getting the result?
Yeah. I think there's two aspects to that. One is just built in the culture, right? If I think great businesses are ones that are naturally curious, and great businesses are ones that's filled with people. And so you want people who are naturally curious. And so you have to accept as a part of being naturally curious when you're a leader that not everything you try is going to work, right? And so making sure that when something doesn't work, we understand, maybe we don't even understand all the reasons why it didn't work, but we understand, okay, that didn't work. It's important that we move on. We've learned something and we want to try something different, right? Especially when we're in problem solving, right? Because we can understand why that didn't work. We may have some hypotheses, but more importantly, we want to have a bias for action. And so what we want to do is we kind of want to move out of the learning phase of, okay, why didn't that work, to we know that one didn't work. Let's not beat it to death. Let's go try something different. What do we want to go try? Right.
Mhm.
And I think that encouragement where it's okay that what you tried didn't work. What I really want to see is I really want to see in the teams where I'm leading, I really want to see the follow through. We talked about this last time around. You guys did it. Okay, it didn't work. That's absolutely fine. It's perfect. It's exactly what we talked about. You tried it and it didn't work. So that's awesome. We know what not to do. So let's go figure out next time around. Okay, let's go try something different. And it's okay the next time around if that doesn't work. But it's the iteration, right? And I'm looking for the team to understand that you're not waiting to come to Greg where Greg tells you go try something different. I love the teams that come to me and say, hey, Greg, we tried this, but it didn't work. So here's what we're going to go do next time around. Like that's nirvana. That's exactly what you want when teams, and it says to me, and from a leadership standpoint, that's when you're working with a bunch of people who really get what problem solving is about,
Yeah.
right? That they understand we have this bias for action we're trying to drive to a solution.
Yeah. So the accountability is on the follow through, right? The taking
Yeah,
action and the curiosity is what drives the learning. I was recently in a panel discussion around CEO succession, and there's basically some data that suggests that one of the best leading indicators for CEO success is curiosity, which I think is a fantastic theme to build a lot of things around, including problem solving. Um, from that standpoint. So whether you're evaluating follow through or curiosity or problem solving capabilities, you have a lot of opportunities to go in, whether it's going in as a new CEO, um, uh, going in to do due diligence, basically going to or just going to work with a new team that's working on
right.
something. How do you evaluate a team, their culture, their capabilities, their mindset for success, and your role in helping elevate that team to where it needs to be?
There are certain things I'm going to be looked for in terms of that curiosity factor. Curiosity is something that I really believe is an element to successful teams. I think the other thing too, and I remember from some earlier work I did with on another podcast I recorded. We had a conversation around discipline. I think the importance of discipline to this is really important too. And discipline isn't rote blindly following the tool like we talked about earlier, but
Mhm.
really understanding. I go back to sort of my military days, right? And there's this concept in the US military around commander's intent. And commander's intent is really on trying to understand what's the big picture, right? So again, going back to the big picture, what's the problem we're trying to solve? If I go back to the case that we want a 20% lift in sales, right? There's making sure that the team is focused on, all right, in the end, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to drive this lift of 20% lift in sales from a year over year standpoint. We're not getting there. So as long as we're not getting there, I'm looking for a team who's bringing new ideas to say this is what we want to do. I One of the measures for me about whether or not that team is really going to be my A team or a BC team, if we kind of use those analogies, is the A team is going to be the team that's constantly iterating, trying things, learning, iterating, doubling down on the things that work without without me getting involved, they have that sort of the authority to go ahead. They understand that they have that authority to go ahead. The BC teams are going to be the ones who maybe lack the curiosity to dig deep, lack the understanding about the commander's intent, and are going to come to the review and say, well, listen, we got a 7% lift, when clearly the problem we're trying to solve is 20%.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if we need to have a discussion around 20% is too big a goal, certainly happy to do that. But I'd rather do that, kind of at a midpoint review than coming to the big sort of, formal scripted leader standard work review where you're coming in and saying, yeah, I didn't meet the goal. I can only get 7%. And here's why. Let's go off before that. Real time when you decide as a team somehow that we can only get 7%, don't wait for the review. Let's talk, because if we've decided as a business this is one of our top 3 problems, and I've just wasted 2 weeks to talk about it before, I mean, that's 2 weeks I can never get back.
Right.
And those 2 weeks, if I'm thinking about my monthly sales, half a month's gone.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I think this whole bias for action is also in the review standpoint. Again, back to not being a slave to the form. I see businesses all the time that say, okay, well, we do our ops reviews, and we do our ops reviews on the second Tuesday of the second week of the month. If something critical comes up that that happens on week 3 on Thursday, I need to know about it then, right? So, and come to me and say, hey, Greg, we want to challenge what we're trying to go solve. Boy, that's great. Those are teams that I really want to work with, because I know that they've got this ownership on the problem, and it's so high up on sort of the importance list that they're elevating it and bringing attention to me, because they're not I'm not always involved in those details. And if they want to let me know this is what we want to do, it's not so much to get my concurrence, but to share with me, wow, here's all the new things we learned that we didn't know before, and we want to share these with you because we really need to reframe this problem. I'm happy to have those conversations.
Well, that's a great note to end on, because you sort of captured all the themes we've been talking about with the discipline, the curiosity, the commander's intent, the framing the problem, the follow through. Um, so I really appreciate you sharing your real world experience from engineer to business leader, and your perspective. Certainly, your mindset as a coach, as leading through coaching, came through without us using that word a whole lot. It certainly was conveyed in how you approach leading teams. So Greg, I thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience with our audience.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Jamie, and always a pleasure to talk to you as a fellow Lehigh alum. So really appreciate the time today.
You as well. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks.